Chapter 4. Wary of a trick, Rayburn insisted they push on at top speed. They put 5 miles before them before they slacked up, and a few minutes later, Dutcher had a long look over his shoulder and exclaimed, "Hell, don't tell me they're dogging us already." Turning to gaze back, Rayburn saw a dozen horsemen at a distance of several miles. They were angling this way, but enough dust whipped up under the hoofs of their horses so that it was impossible to determine who or what they were. "We better line out for the bar 88, said Dutcher uneasily. "Hold on." Rayburn halted him. He was watching steadily. "They're not fogging it. I don't believe that they're Shane and Purcell men at all." A few minutes later, he was sure of it. "It's the detachment from Fort Yance," he declared, relief in his tone. "Wonder what happened." They waited till the cavalrymen drew close, and then rode out to meet them. And as Rayburn had said, it was the same detachment of troopers who had put a stop to the attack on the stage. The young lieutenant gave him a grin. "Howdy, boys. You made it to town without further trouble, I see." "Thanks to you," Rayburn nodded. "Any luck?" There was a pardonable swagger in the officer's response. "Well, we smoked up 3 of them Apaches," he said, "and by a fluke of luck, we nabbed Hapli himself." Dutcher ran his eye over the dusty cavalrymen behind him. They had no prisoner, and Fay grunted. "Where is he?" "Well, fortunately, he tried to escape," was the reply. "Only one thing to do in a case like that," Dutcher commented. "I reckon that'll end the Indian scare for a while, huh?" "I expect it should," the officer agreed dryly. He was returning across country to Fort Yates with his detachment. There was news of 2 other small ranches who had been burned out and massacred by the Red Raiders. Ample justification for the summary of retribution met out to Hapli and his braves. There was further talk, and the military jogged on their way. "All this don't amount to shucks to what's coming now," Dutcher remarked to Rayburn as they pushed on. "A handful of cavalrymen never put it down, that's a clinch," the latter answered tensely. They were still a dozen miles from the Bar 88 ranch house when they entered Gunnarson's vast holdings. The Cattle King's great herds dotted the range in every direction. It was early afternoon by the time the long, low buildings of the ranch came into view. Plainly, Cass Gunnerson had built with a view to permanency. Those weathered adobe walls were 3 foot thick, and a low, continuous apartment ran around the flat roof, behind which riflemen could crouch. The place could easily have withstood a siege. Several vulnerable cottonwoods threw their lacy shade across the yard. A half-dozen punchers were standing outside the bunk room door when they rode up. "It's Rayburn and Fay," one of them said to the others, as if there was some doubt about it. He moved forward, running his eyes over their horses. Reading the brand on the nearest, he grinned. "Just a couple of horse thieves." Stepping out of the saddle, Rayburn said curtly, "Is Cass around?" "He's inside, Rayburn. He's waiting for you." The way these men looked at him told Rayburn what they were thinking. Their usual easy banter was missing. Faces were tight and sober, and there was an air of tension about the place. Fay said, "I'll look after the broncs," and with a nod, Rayburn turned toward the gallery. Before he reached it, their employer stepped out, and Rayburn's glance went to his face swiftly, and even Dutcher stopped what he was doing to wait. Cass Gunnerson was a hard man. He had always been firm. Now, in his mid-50s, there was something flint-like about him. Short, stocky, grizzled, His leathery face was a square hewn. He made himself the overlord of hundreds of square miles of rangeland by virtue of sheer driving force. The bear-like bulk and the energy of his body had stood him in good stead through the years, and his wide mouth was a steel trap, and his eyes blue ice. "You're back, Rayburn. I reckon you heard," he rumbled gruffly. Rayburn nodded, and for a moment their eyes held. Each read what was on the other's mind without need for words. Few men working for the Bar 88 remembered Cass Gunnarson's wife. Dying young, she had been one of the first to be laid away in the little graveyard that topped a knoll behind the ranch house. Jerry, their only son, would have been 24 this season. Raising him according to his own ideas, Case's hard-biting affliction had shown itself chiefly in the sternness of his control, but that he had loved the boy was plain now in the sagging jowls and fierce sunken eyes. He said bleakly, "I sent over to the lawless and had the boys brought here. Kim's in the front room, if you want to see him." Rayburn pushed past him, went up the gallery and entered the house. A Mexican servant woman spoke to him in a murmur, and he saw others moving about, but he didn't speak. He knew his way here. At the closed door of the room Gunnarsson had indicated, he paused. What he was about to do now was one of the hardest tasks he had ever been called on to face, and he pushed inside then. Kim and Jerry Gunnarsson were both there together. Rude, plain coffins had been prepared for them, but as he gazed at his brother's still face, Rayburn was thinking of the hardness of this bed for a healthy, ambitious young fellows to be cut off from the most of life that was still yet before them. Clear and fresh in his mind was the picture of Kim as he had last seen him, laughing, energetic, ready for anything that was good fortune or bad that might be brought. "So, this is Shane and Purcell's idea of what's necessary," he rasped bitterly, fighting back the tide of misery that threatened to engulf him. "I'll square this for you, Kim, if it's the last thing I do." That Tex bunker was already beyond his reach meant nothing. That worthy had been only one out of many. Men as far behind him and as hard to reach as Dan Shane and Mike Purcell were no less responsible for Kim's murder. Rayburn had his moment with the boy, and then returned to the yard. Gunnarsson turned to him abruptly. He was riding himself with an iron curb. "Better get it over with," he muttered. Rayburn agreed. Half an hour later, Jerry Gunnarsson and Kim Rayburn were entered into the little graveyard above the ranch house. It was a brief ceremony, almost cold, for these men were not given to revealing their emotions, and when it was over, Gunnarsson returned to the house and waited there. Rayburn soon followed after him. Cass exploded unwarningly. For a moment, his wrath made the air blue. "By God, Shane and Purcell have gone as far with me as they're ever going to get," he declared fiercely. "This here is the finish. I reckon you're with me, Rayburn." The latter looked away bleakly, considering his answer. "I'm with you, Cass," he said quietly. "It won't take long," the rancher assured him. "I aim to gather my boys and wipe Shane and Purcell clean off the map." Rayburn held his eye for a moment. "You mean you'd ride into Salt Creek and have her out with Gunsmoke?" "Yes." Rayburn shook his head. "You'll never get away with it, Cass," he said soberly. Gunnarsson's steely eyes flashed dangerously. "And why won't I? We're more match for them," he demanded sharply. "Man for man, yes," Rayburn admitted. "But the problem is it won't end there. Don't let your temper hoorah you into anything foolish. Shane and Purcell, they got the law behind them." he proceeded levelly, "and crooked or not, it is the law." "The hell with the law!" the old man bellowed. "I make my own law, Rayburn." "No, you don't, Case. Maybe in a little ways, yes, but this is something else altogether. Don't you see that with this Apache uprising put down, Shane and Purcell can just call in the military? And they will, Cass. They'll do anything they have to stop you." He shook his head again. "You can't fight the army. Not and win." Gunnarsson saw the sense in this. His determination was shaken, but only for a moment, and rage darkened his cheeks and his neck swelled. "Are you telling me them wolves can get away with this and I can't do nothing? It just ain't my style, Rayburn. Nothing you can say can stop me. I'm going to make hash to Pitchfork and ain't wasting no time about her." "I ain't trying to stop you," was the tempted answer. "It's not my way to forget what was done to Kim either. I'm just warning you to go slow, that's all." Gunnarsson was never one to take advice. It was why he had gone so far as he had. Yet his respect for Rayburn's intelligence was such that he subdued significantly to put it into a question. "What would you do?" he grumbled. "Whatever it is, I won't accommodate Shane and Purcell by doing what they expect me to do. You mark my words, Salt Creek is fairly crawling with their men. That Pitchfork will be too." "And who cares?" Cass broke in. "Dan Shane and Mike Purcell have been trying to ruin me for years. All this tin horn rustling and beefing of steers they lay to the Mexicans don't fool me for a minute. By God, they're getting too big for their boots, and when it comes to murdering my boy, shooting 'em down in cold blood—" He choked. "You hit the nail right on the head," Rayburn nodded. "All the other things, they may be true, but this killing is the point right now. What about the posse that did the job?" "Well," Gunnarsson prompted, "not one of them, except Tex Bunker, has shown their faces in town. Landis was certain of that. Give me a few boys and I'll round up those men." Case thought about it. "You'll bring 'em back here, Rayburn, so I can deal with 'em?" he asked in a doubtful voice. "As many as I can." It was said grimly. Gunnarsson threw up his hands. "All right, you win. Take what boys you want and get going," he growled. Rayburn picked a dozen seasoned men, and Fay Dutcher among them. They got away from the ranch at once, and from the moment his proposal to capture the killers was taken form in his mind, Rayburn began to canvass the possibilities. There wasn't very many. Either the possum had ridden straight to Pitchfork to hold up in that stronghold, or they had taken to the hills. "Where are you heading?" Dutcher asked a moment later. "We'll go to the Rail S first," Rayburn answered. "It's just possible we may be able to pick up their sign." The sun was sinking in the west, an enormous orange ball, when they rode out on a ridge overlooking Kim Rayburn's little Rail S spread on Crooked Creek. The place had a forlorn, deserted look about it. Clark had failed to spot a single head of his brother's stock as they approached. Probably Shane and Purcell's riders had gathered the steers and driven them off to satisfy the judgment the firm had obtained against the ranch. Riding into the yard, they had their look around. There was little to be seen. Not until dusk put an end to their investigations would Rayburn admit the hopelessness of trailing the murderers by their tracks. "We sitting here till morning?" Bill Renner, one of the punchers, asked him. Rayburn said no. "There's other ways of finding out where those men went." He swung into the saddle. "For one, I'm not stopping till I've finished this job." The punchers had always liked him. Their loyalty to Case Gunnarsson was just as stanch. "No need to talk that way, Rayburn. We're with you," one of them told him. Satisfied, Rayburn nodded and started off. There was a woodcutter's camp in a canyon a few miles away. It was not easy to find at night, but he managed to do it. There were 3 Mexicans there. Romero, the man who had told Wilkins Landis the stories of the shooting, among them. None of them knew where Bunker's posse had gone, and Rayburn spent 10 minutes assuring himself of this and then turned away. "Now what?" Dutcher inquired. "Robert's stage station ain't far from here. We'll head over that way." 10 o'clock saw the silent cavalcade drawing near the stage station, and pulling up before the door they waited while Rayburn got down. Alamos Roberts was hobnobbed with a freighter in the bar, even more tipsy than usual. Hailing Rayburn noisily, he invited him to have a drink. Rayburn looked him over, deciding he was useless for any practical purpose, and went in search for Kathy. He found the girl in her father's cubbyhole of an office, going over the records. Her eyes narrowed when she looked up and saw him standing in the door, and she got up reluctantly. "What do you want?" she asked. "Have you heard, Kathy? Do you know what happened to Kim?" She nodded, as if words came hard at the moment. "I'm sorry," she began, and then didn't finish. Instead, she demanded flatly, "What has this to do with me, Clark?" He told her how Tex Bunker had been killed. "Me and the boys are after the rest of his crowd. They seem to have disappeared. Did they come by here, Kathy? Have you any idea where they might have went?" He stepped close as he spoke, looking directly into her eyes, for if there was anyone here who would be sure to know all that went on, Kathy was that person. She made no answer for a moment, plainly struggling with herself. Resentment and distrust smoldered in her lovely green eyes. "I don't mean anything to you," she broke out unwarningly. "Why should I tell you these things?" Taken back by her hot answer, Rayburn could only stare his surprise. "Why, you're a mighty fine girl, Kathy," he told her slowly. "I don't know what you mean. Has anyone said anything to make you believe that I think differently?" "No," she admitted reluctantly. "But—" "It's Kim that I'm thinking about now, Kathy," he went on quietly. "Those wolves, they snuffed him out like you would a lamp. If there's any way under heaven I can square with him, I plan on doing it." Her face changed then and softened. "I know," she said swiftly. "It must be terribly hard on you, Clark. They don't deserve a moment's sympathy." She seemed to come to a decision while he waited. "Those men, they stopped here this morning for a drink. They've gone on to Spanish Ford, Clark. You'll probably find them there." Spanish Ford lay a score of miles to the west, deep in the hills. There had once been a settlement there, but now it was no more than an isolated, weather-worn adobe square and plain, like a child's block heedlessly dropped beside the trail. A store there had been proven a failure, and strangely enough, a saloon had fared no better. It remained but an empty shell, all its doors opening outward. Dawn was not far away when Rayburn and his men reached the dry bed of Spanish Creek a mile below the ford. Except to water the horses at a muddy pool, they didn't stop. 10 minutes later, Rayburn turned away from the creek into the low hills through which they could work close without being observed. The adobe stood on a little rise above the creek. Dawn light outlined it against the sky as they drew up at a distance of a quarter-mile. "No horses in sight. Maybe they got 'em in one of the back rooms." He had scarcely finished speaking before the muted crack of a rifle reached their ears. "They spotted us!" Bill Renner exclaimed, and the others looked at Rayburn, tense, expectant. "I don't want any loose lead thrown around here," he warned them. "Those men, they're supposed to be taken alive." At his order, they started to spread out and cut off any possible escape. Soon, the cordon was drawn in on the adobe. One after another, the punchers swung out of the saddle, crawled into positions behind rocks of the crumbling banks. All were within effective rifle range. Rayburn worked along the creek bed on his hands and knees, and Dutcher behind him, until they were close to the house. Rayburn raised his voice. "Hello, the house!" Silence held for the space of 10 seconds, to be broken by an outburst of curses and shouted defiance, and when it died down, one man cried, "What do you want, Rayburn?" "Come on out and give yourselves up." His answer was a chorus of jeers and catcalls. "Come and get us, smoke eater!" one of the postmen taunted. "We got the law with us." "Tex Bunker's dead. He'll not help you now," Rayburn warned. "You'll never leave here alive if you don't give up." He was cursed roundly for his pains, and suddenly a rifle crashed and dirt trickled down the bank in their faces, and Dutcher looked ruefully after his hat, which had been torn from his head. "Seems we're going to have to smoke 'em out." Changing position, he fired twice at the crack of a door from which he judged the shot had came. As if in response to a signal, the guns rang out in the adobe, smashing a challenge. It was answered by a blast from within. The exchange went on without let-up for a quarter of an hour. The besiegers were hampered in their advance by the fact that there was no cover offered whatsoever within 100 yards of the adobe. Bill Renner crawled up to the creek to join Rayburn and Dutcher a moment later. "Seems that they're sticking it out, but they'll have to come out sometime for getting some water." Rayburn had been studying the situation closely. "I got something better than that. Dutcher thinks those men are holed up in 2 rooms, and I think he's right. It means they can't get into the other rooms. We can work around to the back and crawl right up to them." Renner nodded. "I'll go on and get some of the boys." He started away, to return in several minutes with 3 other men. They were listening while Rayburn outlined his plan. A few questions were asked, but it was plain they approved. With Rayburn leading the way, they wormed up the creek. When Dutcher stood up at last, it was to find the back of the adobe towards them. Fay waited alertly, and nothing happened. "All right, come on." He started to run towards the adobe in a low, crouching position, and reaching it without a shot being fired, they began to work towards the front, the other punchers covering their advance. But in some manner the men forwarded up inside had become aware that something was going on, and just as Rayburn started around the front corner, hugging the wall, a man leapt from the door a dozen yards beyond, and he saw Rayburn and fired. Rayburn's shot took him in the thigh, and he went down. Laying there, he went on firing, while Rayburn and the others dodged back to cover. "Butch, Al, drag me inside," the man cried to his friends. "I'll get him," Bill Renner exclaimed, and before Rayburn could stop him, he leapt into the open, his gun up. The postmen cut loose a deadly blast, and Renner sprawled head first, gasping out his life through a hole in his throat. Dutcher grated. "Hell, let's get this over with." He finished the man who had killed Renner with a single shot. Then, springing away from the wall, he ran towards a low, well coping which stood a dozen yards away. Somehow he made it, and from that vantage he began pumping slug after slug through the half-open door from which the postman had emerged. Yells of alarm sounded, and Dutcher cried, "Here they come! They're making a break for their horses." With a rush, the possum burst into the open, their guns flaming. Rayburn and the punchers went into action with a crash. Lead tore through the open space before the adobe, and a man sagged against Rayburn and sprawled out, his eyes glassy. Rayburn accounted for one of the possum and saw two others drop, and a man was trying to drag a horse through a door. Dutcher put an end to that. The horse went down with a bullet between his eyes, blocking the door. As suddenly as it had started, the fight was over, and the possum threw down their guns, yelling, "Don't shoot, Rayburn, we're giving up!" Dutcher would have finished them on the spot, but Rayburn knocked his gun barrel down. "Lay off," he warned sharply. "I told Cass Gunnerson I'd bring him as many of these men as I could, and I aim to deliver." There had been 11 in the bunch holed up in the adobe, and 4 never straddled leather again, and some of the others bore wounds. 2 Bar 88 punchers, besides Bill Renner, had died. While Dutcher helped tie them onto their horses, Rayburn saw to the securing of the prisoners. "It's a dang nuisance to go lugging them around the country," Dutcher growled, staring at them bitterly. Rayburn scarcely heard him. Clearly he had something on his mind. "What I don't understand is why they're waiting here. They could have pulled away as soon as they spotted us, but they didn't. What were they waiting for?" He had his answer a moment later, from an unexpected direction. Suddenly one of the punchers gave a voice to a cry, pointing towards a low ridge across Spanish Creek. Even as Rayburn looked that way, a large bunch of horsemen topped the crest and started down, and they were coming this way. "It's the Pitchfork," Dutcher jerked out. It didn't take Rayburn long to determine that he was right. His mind was working swiftly. "Our only one chance is to hold up right here. We can never get away with these wounded men. Somebody's going to have to ride for help." Dutcher spoke sharply. "Get out of my way, I'm going." He swung into the hall, spurring his horse's flank with a downward sweep of his leg, and the horse started with a bound. That the oncoming men had no inclination of letting him get away was evident by the fact that several of them started racing forward at an angle to intercept him. Rayburn saw that much, and then swung his attention to the business that was immediately at hand. "Get those prisoners inside," he snapped at the men. "Bring the horses in too, then spread out. 2 of you to a room, front, back. Get going. Jump on her." End of chapter 4.